quickly and smoothly that we forget it once took hours of rough travel to cross these rivers that run past the jetties, over the bars, and into the open sea. It's one of the few places in the world, outside the Holy Land, where the myrtle trees grow. It's a region of contrasts. Unexpectedly, at times we turn a corner and come upon a bluff, down which a creek, anxious to find the sea, breaks in restless, flashing ribbons of water. We're never far away from some kind of wildlife. We'll lose a bit of that as we get more population, but we probably will never lose these sea lions, for the sea is a frontier we can't change. Found Hecate Head a long time, or if you're Spanish, you call that a Theta Head.
I'll take Hecate. It's easier. I went rock fishing over there once, but I stayed too long. Got caught by the tide and lost my gear.
The old sailing men, the English and Yankee traders, always treated this northwest coast with a great deal of respect. From the sea, it's a rough-looking shore, and many a full-rigged ship is buried in these sands. But what a fine place it is for a man who, living all week long within 4 office walls, wants to throw his glance outward into the free distance, or to sit in some rocky cove and forget there is an office, or to stroll along a beach hunting for agates, or hunting for nothing, just loafing in the sunlight. Oregon's quite a state for specialty crops, like the cranberry bogs around Coquille.
And as a natural afterthought, we grow enormous numbers of turkeys all around the state. That's another of our choice specialty crops.
Sometimes the coast widens into tideland meadows and the cattle graze and timothy sweetens the air. Sometimes the headlands give way before a small cove in which fishermen lie, and out of which they go toward the offshore banks. It's a smiling ocean until the sou'wester rises. It would be a hard thing to estimate how much of Oregon's wealth has come from fish. Since the first settlement, we've mined our rivers for an elusive vein of silver. Now and then, we seem to strike a new vein. Nobody thought until recently there were tuna off this coast. Nobody now seems to know if they were always there or if it's a new migration.
Ah, fishing. Many's the hour I've spent on the Columbia. I've snagged my gear on every piling between Megler's Ferry and North Jetty. I've been cooked by the sun. I've wallowed around in swells. I've been disgusted. I've been sicker than a dog. Yet when a big one hits the hook, I'm ready for another summer's fishing.
It's odd how we ignore the loveliness of the common scenes around us. Then one day, in a certain light or in a different mood, we see what we didn't see before. We're so often filled with our own thoughts that we travel blindly through the world. I wish people would look outward more than they do. I wish they would let the sights and sounds and smells of the world come into them, and the sky and the distance, the sweep of the shore from a place like Neahkahnie Mountain at sunset, the greenness, the quietness, the unexpected beauty everywhere. If we looked more closely at our world, we'd be a far happier people. Man is a part of nature, a partner of nature. He was meant to see and to feel and to share its wonders. We're lucky in Oregon. In the western half of our state, few people are much more than 2 hours from the sea. The memories of almost every Oregonian go back to the long sweep of the Pacific, to the good, lazy life of sand and surf, to the fun in the beach towns, to the free and careless hours. And for all of us in Oregon, there is the constant flashing out of color along our highways. Color during every season. Being Oregonians, we take all this for granted. We don't do much shouting. Maybe we ought to do more, but that doesn't happen to be our style.
We go along in our pleasant surroundings. We go rather quietly about our business. That is true about us.
Well, I drove all the way up the coast and stopped a moment at the Astor Column, where the history of our state is briefly pictured. Captain Gray, who started all this by discovering the Columbia, Lewis and Clark, who ended their journey here, and the Astor people who founded Astoria, and the Hudson's Bay who once ruled the land. Then I turned inland toward Portland. And, of course, Mount Hood stood up before me. If we have any one great landmark in Oregon, it's this mountain. This peak, as graceful and delicate as a woman. There's always a new vista, a constant changing of light and shadow and of the clouds upon it. If we were pagans, we'd probably worship Hood as the Indians did before us. Our state is made up of several unlike parts. The coast, for one, the long wall of the Coast Range, the inland valleys, the massive Cascade chain, and eastern Oregon.
I remember you took a trip last September.
Yes, I decided to explore the inland valleys, so I went down to the California line and entered over the Siskiyous and into Oregon by way of Highway 99. That entrance to our state is, I think, one of the most attractive.
I've always thought Ashland had a beautiful city park, a model of what a city park should be. You know, Bill, civic beauty isn't hard to create if people will only work at it.
Down here, buried in the Siskiyou Mountains, is another Oregon marvel. These natural caves run far back into the hills. This is a colorful part of Oregon. Early in the 50s, the California prospectors spilled over the mountains and found gold near Jacksonville and along the Rogue. Now, that river, once the scene of frontier excitement, is bordered by summer homes and fishermen's resorts and fruit trees. The orchard has replaced the old-fashioned ranch with its rail fence lines. The plowman no longer plods his weary way behind a team. It's a far cry from the boiled wheat diet of our early settlers to the luxury of a camise pear, which once was reserved for the king's table. We've done well in our 100 years. Our land's been generous. Our great crop has been fir and pine and spruce and hemlock and cedar. The greatest fir forests are still in Oregon. This was the source of our first wealth and is today a major industry. But our methods have changed. The old practice of ripping a hillside bare gives way to selective logging. We're beginning to manage our forests so that they will yield a permanent crop.
I spent a lot of my boyhood around the woods. I earned a lot of my school money in the mills. I can still hear the big head saw, and I can smell the sawdust.
I went through the Umpqua and over into the Willamette Valley, past the University of Oregon at Eugene, and on to Corvallis and through the State College campus. This is the valley, this and the Tualatin, where we began our state. Many a time when I pass our capital at Salem, I think of the pleasant and colorful names that make up Oregon: Coquille, Philomath, Lostine, Umatilla, Metolius, Lone Rock, Sweet Home.
You know something about Oregon, Bill? Even though our cities grow larger, I think we're still a country people at heart. I recall what a wonderful boyhood holiday it was to come into town to see the fair. I never failed to take in the sideshows. My father headed for the stock barns to have a look at the prize cattle. I usually had a calf or two to raise and always hated to sell them.
My people, like a lot of others 40 years ago, usually planned to spend part of a summer vacation picking hops. We'd camp in a tent on the edge of the field. Our fruit trees go back to the first seedlings brought across the plains in emigrant wagons. It's a fine thing to see our valleys in springtime just as the blossoms break. When the bees are working on a warm day, an orchard will send up a humming sound, like a certain tone on a pipe organ. We speak of the marvels of science, but man has yet to match the chemistry of nature. This simple fusion of sap and air and sun, which becomes the sugar sweetness of a peach, or the scarlet shining of a strawberry.
That's one job I never made any money at, picking strawberries. I ate too many, or my back hurt, or the sun got too hot.
I came up through Oregon City, stopped a moment to look at the falls, saw a couple of fellows fishing, as usual, and went on toward Portland. I got there around Rose Festival time.
You know, Bill, Portland's changing.
You sound like any other native.
No, it's breaking over into a big city. It had to happen, of course. The whole Northwest is in for a long period of growth. It's only a question of time when Oregon's 1.25 million will be 5 or 10 million.
We'll grow, of course, and we'll change. But I think the character of the state will remain the same. It will keep the best of its old customs. The festival, for example. As long as flowers bloom in this town, we'll decorate our floats and pick some lovely girl for queen and close our shops and call out the bands, rope off the streets, and put on our parade. There can't be summer around here without a festival. We're not the only place, of course. There's some kind of celebration in every town of any size. Everybody's got a festival. It's a fine thing. It's the way people show pride in their town. It's the way we have of telling ourselves that this is our town, that we all belong to it.
A parade's a wonderful thing. You start early, you get caught in the traffic, somebody steps on your feet, and when you do find a spot, half the parade's gone by.
But it proves one thing, our festival, I mean. This is a land of color. It's all around us through the year.
The early settlers in Oregon were always writing letters back east about the mildness of the climate, the soil's fertility, and the ease with which people got along.
It's still that way. Well, I'd covered the western half of the state, so I decided to turn east from Portland, toward the gorge, and toward eastern Oregon. It's a dramatic thing, the way our state moves from one kind of scenery to another, how the land changes character, how even the people change. West of the Cascades, the air is soft. The colors blend, shade into shade. The earth is gentle. The greenness is always with us. The sun is mild. Clouds drift over the sky. The southwest wind rolls over western Oregon and breaks against the Cascades and fills the streams which interlace the valleys on their run to the sea. We built the state, but land and climate have influenced us. We are all Oregonians wherever we are, but the bland air of the western side has its effect on those who live here, on our mannerisms, our work, our leisure hours. Here we fish for smelt. Moving eastward, the dark Cascades are upon us, rising tier upon tier, and the Columbia cuts its huge trench through the rocks. Lewis and Clark came this way. All the old-time venturers knew it. The first emigrants, wet and hungry and miserable, traveled it. Nearly every foot of that rough gorge has the lost record of some infinitely human and often tragic story. I sometimes think that having lived so long beside the spectacular, we no longer are impressed. Yet these parapets and monster domes and long falling ribbons of water make up one of the true showpieces of the earth. Then, to match nature's daring, we put down there a Bonneville Dam.
I've always thought that a dam, more than anything else, represents our modern belief that we can conquer the physical world.
Each spring in Hood River Valley, the blossoms shine whitely along the hills and across the brown earth of the orchard lands. That changeless pattern of nature is all around us, and we are part of the pattern. The mountain stands in its place, governed by creation's law. In winter, the blizzard winds shout across its peak. In summer, the Chinook blows from the west, and the snow waters rush down the bankful rivers to irrigate a thirsty land. The summer sun further enriches the fertile earth. The sap flows, the fruit ripens. Cherry picking season is a busy time. Oregon becomes another world above the Dalles. Here and there, old ways of life strike up through the modern crust to surprise us. And people do things as their ancestors did centuries before them. Then I remember that no matter how modern we become, the old primitive needs still drive us. And the greatest of these is food. Further east, the soft shades die. The raw colors come in. The air is different, filled with sharp, new odors. The neat farms of western Oregon are seen no more. Out here, distance runs on and on. The fields of wheat march over a rolling earth toward far-off hills.
You know, I like to look at wheat. I guess it's because wheat is one of man's oldest foods. And maybe there's a sort of primitive memory that hangs on in people. Most early tribes had religious celebrations when their crops ripened. It meant the difference between life and death to them. Perhaps a little of that is still in us.
Wheat is the traditional crop of the prairie lands, but the West is enlarging its agriculture. New things are tried. Peas grow now where nobody thought they could be grown profitably. A new industry comes to the sagebrush country. More and more, Oregon turns to specialty crops and builds these into importance. We've become a center for the growing of seeds. Wherever they are, people must celebrate. West of the mountains, it's a festival. East of the mountains, it's a roundup. Here's where the West begins, the early West that comes soonest to our minds, the old West we love to recall. The Indians, cattle and cowhands, horses and leather, lazy talk.
Lazy talk? I watched a fellow bulldog a steer once. He got one of those and he twisted and heaved and wrestled and got nowhere. He was talking to himself, but it wasn't lazy talk.
We've destroyed a lot of time out here. It's an hour's run over the Blue Mountains. Once it took a week. These eastern Oregon highways go on and on. They reach out in a hurry for the rim of the earth. Sometimes from a high point we look out upon a valley, checkerboarded way below, softened by heat mist. Up in the northeast corner of the state lies the Wallowa Valley, and nearby the lake. And beyond the lake, the great granite chunks rise off the plain. The roads go a short distance into them and die. And from there on, nothing but a trail leading upward, switchback style, across the face of the canyon wall. Way up lies the basin, its meadows and lakes, its stony peaks rising all around. It's a long way from trouble and very close to heaven. Over in that corner of the state also lies the Imnaha Canyon, which, astonishing as it may be, is only an introduction to that tremendous crack in the Earth's surface, the deepest cut in North America, Hell's Canyon, or the Grand Canyon of the Snake River. Down in the bottom lies a wicked river which few men have traveled.
Do people live down there?
Yes, ranchers and prospectors and folks who like to be alone. Eastern Oregon is all kinds of country. Again, we see Oregon's variety.
There are many pleasant, busy little cities. Good places to live.
Many interesting places to go. Among other things, Oregon is cow country. Not the longhorn cow of early times. Beef today grows as a square block of flesh propped up by 4 stubby legs. And the less those animals use for running, the better the rancher likes it. All through the prairie country, little creeks come out of the hills to water meadows of wild hay, whose sweet, rich stems make cattle raising possible.
Haying is one of the hottest jobs a man can work at.
Some of the ranch houses are picturesque, but more often they are modern and efficient. Oregon cattlemen are businessmen who assemble the first materials of nature, grass and water, sun and fertility, into a final streamlined product. They are manufacturers supplying the American table. They are grassland industrialists. In the north-central part of Oregon, nature turns gaudy. The hills are streaked with red, orange, tan and brown, pink and gray. Far back in time, this was a semi-tropic swamp where the early beasts roamed. It's a treasury for fossil hunters who come to dig year after year. Out here, it's not water. Thousands of acres in this region lie unused except for casual grazing. What men here look for are the sources of water. They capture the seasonal flows, carry them great distances, and spread them out upon the land in dry season. This is a land cruel to anything weak. Nothing grew in that ground except the ancient plants of the dry places, sage, greasewood, juniper, bunch grass, and small, strange flowers. But when water touches it, the richness locked in through the centuries comes pushing up, and the green growth spreads thickly over it, replacing the dusty grayness. Beyond Nyssa, to the south and west, lie the lakes wherein the wild birds settle during their seasonal migrations along the great north-south flyway. These lakes and a few narrow streams are lonely waters in a far-flung desert. Up from this flat country, the Steens Mountains rise bold and massive. From the summit, the roundabout country lies seemingly endless under the sun's hard shining. A haze hangs in the air. Idaho lies yonder to the east, Nevada to the south. These are the only borders in this great country of space, so thinly populated that everybody knows everybody else for 50 miles around. The roads jiggle back and forth through the dust and the sage, never seeming to get anywhere. It's an immense and a lonely country. People are few and far between. There's plenty of time. Why hurry? Take it easy. Might as well go up into the Steens and bring out a buck. It's a good deer country. It's a cattle country, too. The white faces look fat. The grass has been fine. There's been some water on the land.
It's a pretty good life. But sometimes when trying out a tough horse, the horse is a little too tough.
It's sheep country. As a matter of fact, it's so big that you can call it any kind of country and you wouldn't go far wrong. I'd traveled this part of eastern Oregon, so there was one section left, central Oregon. So I went down to Klamath Falls and worked north from there. There was a time when all this central part of the state was pine and sagebrush, lava, grass, and dust. That wasn't so long ago. But once they got water on it, the desert blossomed as a rose. It's the old story again. This is the place of the big, mealy, netted gem potato. It's timber country, too. The red-barked logs come out of the forests along the east slope of the Cascades, into the pond, into the mill. These lumber mills of south-central Oregon are always buzzing with activity, and with planning, we'll be cutting this pine forever. The highway follows the shores of Klamath Lake for many miles. This country is 4,000 feet high. The sun soaks in. The air is keen. The road is good and stretches out for a long run through central Oregon. North of Klamath Lake, up on the spine of the Cascades, the scenery gets a little out of hand. The road rising through the foothills passes Annie Creek Canyon and goes on up to Crater Lake. Long ago, a lava mountain blew up. A huge pit was formed. Water filled the pit. It's not a very easy thing to describe Crater Lake.
It's the deep blue color of the water that always amazes me.
World travelers say it is one of the Earth's scenic wonders. It is said to be the deepest lake on the continent of North America. beyond Crater lies Diamond Lake, and beyond Diamond, other high lakes continue like beads on a string. From Bend, or from any nearby place, the great snow peaks stand out in a 300-mile panorama, one of Oregon's unforgettable scenes. Not so long ago, Bend was only a camp spot on the edge of a sagebrush desert. Now it is a city with its parks and its trees and pleasant life. 25 years ago, I drove through this country at 12 miles an hour over straggling, rutty roads. Now we travel at 55 along a highway that rolls across the flats and toward the mountains like an undulating velvet carpet.